Hello everyone and welcome back to another Strategoi video. Today we're doing a GHB review and we're splitting this video up into different parts, and as always I have my co-host Ryan here to tackle some of the more mathematical stuff and also deliver his usual stellar insights on the matter. Ryan, thank you for joining me.
Of course, I'm actually really excited to have you at leading the discussion again for multiple reasons, including not only just more time, but also people are probably, the channel for your lovely ASMR-esque voice
Hmm.
and your insights. And I feel like the channel just doesn't quite feel the same without you here. So I'm glad to have you back.
Yeah, I was just gonna say it feels like I'm picking up a job that I haven't done for a while.
Yeah.
In the sense that it's been such a long time since I've been the main host for a video. Not that I am now, but at least I'm opening the video. So yeah, I'm excited to. You dropped away there for a couple of seconds, so please hang in there, everyone that's watching. If it happens too often, we'll probably re-record a small piece of it. It was just a couple words though, so nothing to worry about, Ryan.
Okay.
So yeah, we're approaching this GHB a little bit differently than the ones before that. The last time, if you guys followed along with the last GHB, we did a whole review of everything, and that was quite lengthy. And also, we felt like we would skip missions for these kinds of videos for a while because both Ryan and I want to get some experience first, so that we're not delivering false information to you guys. And I was actually just talking to Ryan about his first couple of games that he played, and you already mentioned, Ryan, that you've learned so much from just a couple of games, right?
Yeah, I just came off. We had a very competitive tournament that I'll be doing a report about here in the Netherlands that was basically people prepping for Worlds. And I only got two practice games with the new GHB before, and then five very competitive games. And the consensus was everyone felt like they were learning on the job, if you will.
Yeah.
And there are definitely things I would have never understood had I not done it in person, and maybe had the feedback of some people, kind of working on it at the same time with me. So even if I had just been playing it in a vacuum by myself, I don't know if I would have noticed. So there's definitely a lot of nuance to this GHB.
Yeah. Yeah. I completely agree. It's a very big change of pace, but I really like it so far.
Yeah, I think everyone seeming to like it.
Yeah,
So
yeah. Okay, so what are we going to cover in this part? So in part one, we're covering the realm rules, the realm magic, Nullstone, adornments, command traits, and the battalions. That means that we're saving grand strategies and battle tactics for part two and missions for part three. Part one and part two will be released pretty close together, but part three, as I just mentioned, is going to come out a little bit later down the line. Before we move on to our review of the full GHB, we first want to cover a couple of things that are really good to know before this video specifically. First of all, it's the battle scrolls. So the battle scroll is a separate PDF that GW has released. You can already check it out in their FAQ section, and it changes some bigger rules throughout the game. The reason that they have that battle scroll is because battle scroll rules can be adapted more easily than book rules. There are two rules out of the battle scroll that we really wanted to highlight before we dive into the GHB. Ryan, why don't you take it away with the coherency rules change?
sure. So what we used to have before in the last GHB was either Galician veterans as a just perma rule that was in there for the first one of last year's season, the two split 6-month seasons, where units that were Galician veterans, which had its own definition, got to fight in two ranks, which is basically within a half inch of a half inch, a guy that was within half inch of a unit. And then in the second half of that GHB cycle, we had a core battalion that you could take. So that rule fell off, but then it got migrated into a core battalion, which of course raised your drops, but it was a way to take those big elite units that wanted to be, like, let's say a unit of 3 that bumped up to 6 or double reinforced to 9 so that they could all fight. Well, that's gone. But with the coherency rules changed, that where it used to be the cutoff point of the better coherency rules, where you only had to be within 1 inch of one model in your unit at 5 or less models, and then 6 or more required you being within 2. So if you had a unit of just enough, 6, you had to basically be in 2 ranks, which often meant you wouldn't be reaching that second rank, couldn't fight until you lost a guy. Or unless you did a special kind of like pile in. Now it's changed to 6, which makes a huge quality of life improvement for so many different units out there, especially elite units on bases like Kurnoths that are on swords, or other kind of like Vargolf type units, or whatever that's on that big base. Yeah, Kroxigor. So many units that are really loving life. And I think it kind of solves the problem that we had with GHB, or with GHB, GW having so many units that really wanted a 2-inch range, and now we're kind of in a nice sweet spot for that. So yeah, I think this is a huge quality of life change for a lot of units in a lot of armies.
Yeah, I agree. It's massive. The next rule, the lookouts rule, has also been updated. So before, it was only if you were within 3 inches of a unit with at least 3 models, and your hero was targeted by a missile weapon, the shooting unit had to subtract 1 from their to hit rolls. That is still the case, but now also they cannot target those heroes if those heroes don't have a mount, and that's it, I think, and have 9 or less wounds. And if they are outside of 12 inches. Okay, so let me rephrase that because that was messy. So if your hero is within 3 inches of a friendly unit with at least 3 models, and it has no mount and 9 or less wounds, it cannot be targeted by enemy units that are outside of 12 inches with missile weapons. That is quite big. Basically means that your small heroes won't get sniped. And it's also pretty cool that it works on unique heroes. So your Antorian, for example, is safe from shooting attacks, at least for a while.
Just real quick, the mount rule, that change does actually make a lot of sense, because if you're sitting on a horse,
people notice you.
But keep in mind that their mounts are technically also companions, but GW's been doing a good job of saying the exception here, that in this rule as well, if you have a companion, like you have a little fish or something that flies around with you, like some of the Ideneth guys, then you do still benefit from this change. So that's positive.
Yeah. It is difficult to keep track of all those little addendums because, as we'll notice in the next slide, the first new rule of the GHB does include units with mounts. And it kind of messes up my head with all that new information. 2 other quick things we wanted to mention. So in the GHB, there's also changes to endless spells, of course. Ryan has already done a video on that. It's up right now. If you want to check it out, it's really cool. And it goes into much more than just the changes. If you haven't seen Ryan's videos on endless spells before, it is very mathematical, but there's no actual maths involved. It's just the results, and it really helps you understand the value of certain spells that you wouldn't otherwise understand as well. So that is a good job, a job well done, Ryan.
Oh, thanks, buddy.
And of course, there are the points changes. It's in the app and also in a separate PDF. All right, let's get to the juicy stuff. So we've moved on from Galais or Galette, and we're now in Antor, which is a very weird thing to pronounce because as a Star Wars fan, I always want to say Andor or Endor. But yeah, we're in Antor. And here things are very magical and not fun magical, of course, because it's Age of Sigmar. Everything's terrible. But there is magic all around. So one with the land. Wizard heroes with a wound characteristic of 9 or less that are not unique gain the Antorian locus keyword. That in and of itself means nothing, but there are a lot of rules that are tied to that Antorian locus keyword. So it is quite a big deal. Now, I think this also means that you really want small-ish wizards, and with the new lookouts rule, they are probably going to survive a bit longer, and you're going to see some crazy stuff. There are going to be times where a very small vampire lord or maybe even a small goblin teleports forwards and deletes a big monster with some massive new spells from this book. So yeah, being an Antorian locus is very good. Anything you want to add before we move into optimal focus?
We'll see how it all interacts, and then we can talk about it more.
Yeah. Okay, so optimal focus is this GHB's version of lending some aid to the second player. So at the start of the battle round, after priority is determined, the player taking the second turn can pick one friendly hero on the battlefield. If that hero is an Antorian locus, they can attempt to cast one extra spell in their own hero phase and attempt to unbind one extra spell in the opponent's hero phase. And all of that happens in that same battle round. Or if they are not an Antorian locus, you receive 1 command point, but it can only be spent to allow that hero to issue a command. I like this a lot. It is very flavorful. It just also feels very impactful. It is nice to just get a free command point if you don't have a wizard, but usually you will have a wizard because that's what the GHB wants you to bring. So if you have that option, you're probably bringing at least 1 Antorian locus. And being able to cast and unbind an extra spell is very strong. So yeah, I love this rule. It's very good.
Yeah, my big thing is, in my experience thus far, and maybe I'm biased because I'm playing KO right now, but is that playing without wizards, even if you have access to them, like via allies or whatever, is actually pretty strong once you get into the Nullstone adornments and stuff. So I feel like keeping that in mind, like this is buffing the wizard stuff, but that extra CP can go a ways too.
Yeah, exactly.
What I can say from my first 7 games of this is I was reminding people of this rule basically every single turn, every battle round, because it's super easy to forget. People are getting used to it, and yeah, I mean, like, it's just one of those things where, because it's a can, not must, in super tournaments or like competitive tournament environment, if someone, I can imagine a world where if you forget to say which one it is, they're not going to let you have that extra cast. That's too strong, you know?
Yeah.
So keep in mind that this is one of those things that has to be decided before you guys get going with the battle round, after priority is determined, though.
Yeah.
So.
If you're one of those people that forgets, I actually made a cheat sheet of the new GHB, and it's right on top of your page there. So if you're looking for some gaming aids during your games, the battle tactics are in there as well. Go to our Discord, and in the Strategoi update section, you can already download that sheet. Okay, moving on to Primal Magic. As Ryan mentioned, there are a lot of ways actually that buff magic users or magic wielders, and one of those ways is the Primal Magic, although it kind of punishes them as well, I guess. So at the start of the hero phase, there is yet another thing you have to do now, apart from picking your battle tactic and your heroic actions. Both players roll a dice. For each 4+, each player receives 1 Primal Magic dice. So that means that you'll always have the same amount of dice from this specific rule, unless you have different ways to generate Primal Magic dice. After a player attempts to cast or unbind a spell, or attempts to dispel an endless spell, they can roll one of their Primal Magic dice. If they do so, add the result to the casting, unbinding, or dispelling roll. That player can continue to roll additional Primal Magic dice until the caster suffers a Primal Miscast, or there are no Primal Magic dice to be rolled. The FAQ also mentions that if you add a Primal Magic dice to a casting roll, it doesn't actually change the roll to that number. So let's say you rolled a 6 with your normal casting and then add a 4 from your Primal Magic dice on top of that. Your casting value doesn't automatically go up to 10 for a casting roll, but it is considered as being successful if your casting value was, for example, at least needed to be a 9 or something. But if you're thinking, ooh, I love my Warsong Bomb as a Sylvaneth player, and I'm just going to throw Primal Magic dice on top of that for more mortal wounds, that actually doesn't interact that way, so that doesn't work.
Right, and to clarify that, a lot of the battle scroll changes went through and changed the wording on a number of important spells to say it's unmodified. So something like the Warsong got not just interacting with this rule, but also interacting with the +1 to cast that the Warsong has. That no longer works. So there's a number of places where that was particularly strong and got cleaned up even further outside of this.
Yep. Okay. Some things that you have to keep in mind that also are part of the Primal Magic dice rule, or the Primal Magic rule. Abilities that allow rerolls must be used before Primal Magic dice, and you cannot use Primal Magic dice to supplement that roll. So that is interesting to keep in mind. For example, if you're a Lumith player and you're rerolling with your Aether Quartz or your Shrine, keep in mind that even with that reroll and you would succeed, your opponent will have their chance to add primal magic dice, and you won't be allowed to. That is quite interesting. And also, just like command points, any dice that are not used by the end of the round are lost. Anything?
Yeah, thus far, what you just said, I actually find that in general, person unbinding has much more of an advantage here than the person casting.
Yeah, for sure.
There are just too many downsides to adding, unless you just have to pump that one spell out. But we'll talk more about the implications in a bit.
Yeah. I completely agree. Any unmodified casting roll with primal magic dice that includes a double 1 is a primal miscast. So that could be double 1 from the get-go. Obviously, you won't be adding primal magic dice to that, but it could be that you rolled a 1 for your normal casting and another 1 with a primal dice. That's also possible. So any double 1 is a primal miscast. And then bad things happen. The spell is not successfully cast. The caster suffers D3 plus 3 mortal wounds, which on average is killing your small heroes from the get-go. And each unit within 3 inches suffers D3 mortal wounds. The caster cannot attempt to cast any more spells in that phase. And that is scary. Very scary.
Yeah, and you know what's interesting? If anyone's just got the GHB but is looking at it in the printed version in the book, and isn't looking at the battle scroll changes or the FAQ changes, keep in mind that GW wrote this section really poorly, and there was a lot of interpretation. And they've cleared a lot of that up with the designer's commentary and FAQs. So what we're trying to deliver here is the updated version of that. But it wasn't clear up front, for example, why you would add a dice to something that was already a double 1, like what Jonas just said. Or why you would, they made it sound as though you had to kind of decide to throw all of your dice at once and then risk possibly. But obviously, once you see that first 1, let's say you didn't roll 1 in your initial roll, and then you see a 1 come up, you're probably not going to risk it anymore. Whereas there were people thinking, oh, it's more of a risk reward kind of thing, where if you're going to add 2, you need to say it right up front and roll them not knowing what you're going to get. Mm-hmm. That's not how it works. It's always one after the other, and then you can update your thing. But the caster has to go first. So the caster has to use as many primal magic dice as they're going to use, and then the unbinder gets to see what they're going to do after they've even rolled. So they can roll for the normal roll and then decide to add things. So which is there is that amount.
Yeah, and it's absolutely brutal.
Yeah.
On top of that primal miscast, you also have a primal autocast, I suppose. So any unmodified casting roll with a primal magic dice, that includes a double 6 and is not a primal miscast, is successful and cannot be unbound. The caster cannot attempt to cast any more spells, sad face, in that, and both players receive 1 new primal magic dice. So that's quite cool. So any double 6, just like with the double 1, so it could be 2 double 6s on your normal roll, or 1 from the primal magic dice and 1 from your normal roll, or 2 on the primal magic dice, or whatever. Any double 6s is an autocast, and it cannot be unbound, which is very juicy.
So thinking about the implication, if you do roll 2 6s on your initial roll, you get a 12, and it's not yet this primal autocast.
Yes.
Because you haven't added a dice yet. Now you'll be getting a dice back, so you might think it's the same, but it's not, because your caster can't. First off, it can't be unbound with any amount of primal magic dice from your opponent, and the caster loses all of their future casts. So you might not want to actually toss that primal magic dice in there. It doesn't matter what you roll at that point. But you might not want to throw it in there because you have another cast to do.
Yeah.
Especially remember if you chose to have your Antorian locus have an extra cast, right? Mm-hmm. And so then even if your army is full of 1 casters, it's still possible that you got that extra cast on someone, and now you're like, oops, if I use this, I so there's a trade-off mechanic going on.
Yeah, and this rule also gives your opponent more unbinding potential throughout your turn, the rest of your turn, or the rest of your hero phase, because you've spent at least 1 primal magic dice to get this non-unbindable spell, right? And you both get 1 primal magic dice back, but your opponent's obviously not wasting 1 of theirs on an unbinding attempt. So they'll have 1 more than you have at that point, which is something you have to consider.
Yeah, and maybe it's best if it's the end of the battle round, they're going to
Yeah.
like the level you have, whatever.
Okay, you dropped away there for a second. Maybe it's best if.
Yeah. So maybe it's best if it's the end of the battle round and you know you're going to lose all these points anyway. So you're not actually giving them that much of an advantage. Let's say it's on one of your last spells or they don't have any more unbinds. Remember, they can't just magically unbind something. Unbind. So even if they have like 4 primal magic dice, but they have no unbinds left, you can. It doesn't matter if you accidentally give them another one. You know.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Okay. So some hot takes on this, Ryan?
Pretty much everything I've said. I think it's really actually more in favor of the unbinder, because you can't. There's no such thing as a primal unbind, like where you like blow up or something. There's no risk for them, and especially in armies that don't have any wizards, this is basically pushing them over the edge of actually being able to do something about it. You know, so I found in my games as a KO player with absolutely no wizards in my that this was really strong for me. And I fear for Techless.
Yes. Yeah. It is a bit of a pity because obviously it neuters Techless a little bit. It also looks much more advantageous to the caster only at a first glance, as you mentioned, because when you start to think about it, as the caster, you always have to risk everything by adding primal magic dice, and your opponent doesn't necessarily have to react to it. If they see, oh, okay, he spent a primal magic dice, whoops, he exploded. Or, okay, he spent a primal magic dice and he didn't even succeed. They're not losing any of their unbinding potential. And let's say you used all your primal magic dice to get your one most important spell through. For example, if you're a Lumineth player, Speed of Hitch, which is probably one of the most important spells you can cast in a hero phase. And you already used all your primal magic dice, or you use your primal magic dice and your rolls were bad, and your opponent rolls well, and that's stats. You know, it is painful. I'm not actually sure that my suggestion that I'm now going to make is necessarily better, but I would have liked some kind of mechanic where you kind of had to reveal how many dice that you were going to use. Let's say that I, for example, I roll a 3 on my power of Speed of Hitch roll, and I get to choose how many dice I use, and you get to choose whether you're gonna reply in kind. A little bit like poker, right? You level with me. If I'm saying I'm using 1 primal magic dice, you only get you get to use 1 of your own or none, but you have to reveal that before I actually roll. That would be a much more fair interaction, I think.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of what I meant by the one interpretation that people might have had. The thing too about that is it would definitely balance out the imbalance between the unbinder and the caster, in that a lot of unbinders, what they're really hoping for is to balance out this quote-unquote magic season. If you did that, I think it would take most of that away from them. But that's kind of also a point, is that the joke is every single GHB gets advertised as though it's monster season, or though it's Galician champion season, or whatever, and in this case magic season, and then it turns out that it's actually almost better to be the opposite, like the counter player. That said, I do think this has a lot of interplay and gives wizards, there's a lot more variance in how strong your wizards can be in general. Like, you can really push some stuff out that you previously couldn't do. Now you can take some spells that have casting value 8, 9, or 10, if you have that access to any of those, and actually expect to get them off. There's some cool interactions here. Last point that I'm thinking about while looking at this about primal miscast is that you have the units that are within 3 inches also suffer mortal wounds, which, of course, to your earlier point about being an Antorian locus that is trying to stay alive, or being whoever, because remember, this rule does not require that you're an Antorian locus. It seems like it would be paired with that, but this could be could be Archeon. This could be as big as you want, and mounts and everything. Well, that was never a problem, but. My other point here, though, is that if you're standing next to someone to get Look Out Sir, there's a trade-off. If you do miscast, primal miscast, you're going to end up hurting them. So it's interesting. There's a lot of trade-offs here. I
don't really actually remember the exact wording, but would you be able to bodyguard these mortal wounds from the Primal Miscast?
Yeah, unless, I mean, it doesn't say anything about not being able to not be negated.
Yeah, I don't think so either. That's just something that I thought about. Yet another reason to run Blade Lords, you guys.
Yeah, if you have a bodyguard unit in your army and think you're going to be playing a little fast and loose magic dice, then sure.
Yeah, because with the Merciless Blizzard spell, which is coming up in a second, that does specifically mention that they can't be negated. But this doesn't, if I remember correctly.
No, I'm looking at it right now. It doesn't say anything about that.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so this system is actually... It is very well tuned to the new spells that they created, and I feel like it's made specifically for that, but it does mean that some more Battletome specific spells are getting hit a lot by Stronger Unbinding. But I also understand the need for it, because some of the spells from this GHB are really crazy. Speaking of which, let's move on to those. So Ryan mentioned there is an entire section for non-wizard armies. It's called the Nullstone Adornments. But there's also a section for magic armies, or at least armies that bring a wizard or an Antorian locus. So you can pick one spell from the Lore of Primal Frost, shown below here, for each Antorian locus in your army, instead of picking one spell from another spell lore that they know. There are 3 spells. I would say that 2 of them are ones that you probably want at least one of in your army, and the middle one is a little bit more situational, but definitely not useless. So the first one I was already teased on Warcom. It's called Hoarfrost. It has a casting value of 8, and it has to target a friendly unit wholly within 12 inches and visible to the caster. You get to pick one melee weapon on that unit's war scroll and roll a d3. Change either the to hit roll, the to wound roll, or the rend characteristic of that melee weapon. Sorry, the to hit characteristic, the to wound characteristic, or the rend characteristic of that melee weapon to the rolled results until the start of your next hero phase. The characteristic cannot be further modified or changed. That was added with the FAQ. So what does that mean? Let's say you rolled a 2 on the d3. You could choose to make your 4+ hit to change it to a 2+ hit, or you could choose to change your 0 rend to a -2 rend. So yeah, that is very juicy. To be honest, I'm not sure how you feel about this, Ryan, but I thought it was going to be better than it actually is. How do you feel about it?
I mean, it depends on the unit. Literally at this tournament, I just came from the Zinch player put this on a unit of 6, Zangor Enlightened on disc to change the to hit roll from a 4 to 2.
Yeah.
So that's making it way better. Mm-hmm. That output improvement is much better. Or improving the rend of something. He put it on the pinks and the blues.
Yeah.
They have no rend on their profile. And then you're buffing it. You can make it -3, which it did with like 30 something attacks.
Yeah.
Or something more. And then you of course all out attack that unit. And then yeah, there's a lot of stuff you can do, but you have to be good about what unit you're putting this on. It's not for shooting, obviously. It's a little bit dependent on the D3. So then you have to ask yourself, if I roll a 3, for example, obviously you're going to choose rend most likely. But, you know, like a 1, like you said here, if you already have a good profile with 2s for some reason, that 1's not helping you except to ignore minuses, because 1s still fail. But then, if they have a -1, a 1+ goes to a 2 still. So that could be good. I think it really depends on the unit. And I actually think you said that 2 out of 3 of these are good. I actually think this is the only one that's clearly good, and only for obviously armies where you're trying to do this. But I think this has got a lot of flexibility. It can take a kind of otherwise weak magic army that doesn't have a lot of combat options and really put them up.
Yeah.
I think if they'd made it save, it would have gone insane.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
If you could take a unit and push its save characteristic up to 1, 2, or 3.
Disgusting.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, this is obviously the best one because it fits into most armies anyway, while Rupture and Merciless Blizzard are a little bit more situational. But like I use it on my Dawn Rider units who already hit on 3s and wound on 3s on a charge, and then I changed their rend to -3, which I thought was going to be very juicy, but it didn't really end up doing a whole bunch. So it's very dependent on what unit you're using it on, as you already mentioned, Ryan. It's also interesting to call out for all you your Metrica Lumineth players out there. The change from the FAQ, so saying that the characteristic cannot be further modified or changed, was obviously aimed at units that already added another -1 rend, for example, with Tree Song from Sylvaneth. But it also means that your Metrica bonuses actually do not nullify anything that Hoarfrost puts on the rend characteristic. So even if it's a -1 or a -2, which it would normally nullify, it doesn't really change that at all. So that is quite rough. But other than that, I really love this spell. It's super flexible. You get different mileages out of it, as we already mentioned, Ryan. But yeah, I love it. I don't think I would ever not bring it.
Yeah, it's also the cheapest of the 3, which is another.
Yeah, that's what I mean. You know, every army has a chance of getting this off at least once in a game, right?
Yeah, with Primal Magic decks, for sure.
Yeah.
Now, keep in mind, before we move on, that these are only for Antorian.
Yes.
And they are replacing your chosen spell. So I'm just going to throw it out there that I think there's some new value in enhancement to know an extra spell.
Yes.
So that your whole army can pick one of these, or at least can pick one of these in addition to the spell you probably used to want to take from your battle tome. So
it's funny that you mentioned that, because I actually built all my lists now with that extra enhancement. Because I just love magic armies.
Yeah. As long as you can afford raising your drops, if you think you're really going to want spells, I can see that being a hot pick.
Yeah, and I mean, there's also new command trays that allow you to know all of these 3 spells. That is also not a bad command tray to have compared to some other ones. So it's opening up options that you never really had to think about before, or not as much as now at least. Okay, so the second one is probably the most situational one. It's a casting value of 10, target wholly within 18 inches. The target is a predatory endless spell or an incarnate, wholly within range and visible to the caster. The target immediately becomes wild and cannot be picked to be controlled or bonded for the rest of the battle, which is huge. This not only is a way to guarantee a specific battle tactic, but it can also actually be used on your own incarnates, which is interesting.
Yeah, people are expecting that to get changed because going wild is what you want it to do.
Yes.
It sounds like it's a bad. People are expecting that to get changed, but we'll see. The thing is, it's so easy to get rid of endless spells now because remember, you don't have to roll higher than what was originally rolled for it. So the boost out a endless spell doesn't make it any harder to get rid of the next turn.
Yeah.
And then making it so it's wild and can't be bonded or controlled. Well, if that's to the disadvantage of the player that you did it against, well, they're just going to dispel their own spell so they have control over it again once they cast it. Now, the question, of course, is, does that mean that the target unit in that person's army can't be controlled for the rest of the battle? I'm assuming they mean literally the instance of it that's on the field right now. It doesn't like change its characteristic as a endless spell that they put in their army list, that it can never be controlled again.
That would be really weird.
That would be strong, and that would be worth a cast value of 10. But just making it so it's wild means that you get to move it for one turn, but then they're just going to dispel it in the next turn, and then they get to cast it again, and it goes back to being what it was, and you just wasted taking this casting value 10 thing. Now, you were talking about the battle tactic. So they changed the battle tactic and got a bunch of it. Now you have to kill the enemy unit that summoned it, or you have to make that incarnate go wild. Now, keep in mind, a lot of people aren't taking incarnates, at least at this moment. So I don't know how valuable that actually is. It used to say on the battle tactic that the endless spell goes wild, but it's no longer a thing anymore.
Yeah.
They deleted that line. So I don't know. What were you thinking? Were you just thinking for the incarnate?
Yeah, I was just thinking for the incarnate, and I wasn't actually making a point that it's worth taking it for that reason, but it is a reason to take it. It's not worth it, but it is a reason.
Yeah, and that incarnate does, in fact, for that battle tag, be your enemy's
Yeah.
incarnate. So
The thing is,
I don't know.
If the casting value of 10 is fair if you can target your own incarnate, which you can right now, but it's ridiculous for an endless spell, because dispelling it in endless spell is usually better, and it's much easier. While if you would lower that casting value and you would still be able to target your own incarnate, that would be very strong. So yeah, maybe they have to change it to enemy incarnate and put the casting value to a 6 or a 7 or something.
Yeah, there's this thing where they clearly are going. Spoiler alert for people who haven't seen it, but the casting values go up from 8 and then increment by 2, so 8 to 10 to 12. So I think there's something about that. Whatever.
Oh, you dropped away there. There's something about that?
Something about that they find beautifully symmetrical or whatever.
Yeah.
And so I have a feeling they're not lowering this because it just looks nice in the book. So I have a feeling they would be more inclined to the rule. I don't know. I do think they need to change the way it works with endless spells. It's just not that handy.
Yeah.
So.
And then now for the most juicy spell, probably not the best one, not definitely not the safest one, but the juiciest one for sure. Merciless Blizzards. It has a casting value of 12 and a range of 12, so that's also very symmetrical. It needs you to pick one enemy unit within range and visible to the caster, and that unit suffers 4d6 mortal wounds. But there's a kicker. For each roll of a 1, the caster also suffers d3 mortal wounds that cannot be negated, so no wards, no bodyguarding, nothing. The range of this spell cannot be modified and must be measured from the caster, even if an ability will allow to measure it from somewhere else. So that's disallowing portals, that's disallowing Spellsinger. Nothing can actually increase the range of this spell by any way. So yeah, Merciless Blizzards. I really like this one. It's the one that you're going to tell stories about, but it's also super risky. And even if you get in range, casting value of 12 is huge. So actually getting off this spell is not as easy as it looks. And then you're also still left wondering, what if they dispel it, unbind it, or what if I roll bad on my 46 mortals? But yeah, just the chance of this popping off and doing a big amount of damage is so tempting. How do you feel about the Merciless Blizzards, Ryan?
Yeah, so the casting value is high, and there's almost no one who can cast this that can take it. Obviously, Teclis would if he could take it, but he can't.
Yeah.
But without using primal dice, so you're implicitly raising your risk, and then of course they've got primal dice to unbind it too. So I'm thinking you're probably wanting this on a wizard who has casting bonuses already, so that you're not investing so much of your effort into getting this out there and just to have it get unbound anyway. But obviously my mind is mainly focused on the math of it all. So as anyone that knows, a d6's expected value is 3.5, 2d6 is 7, and then obviously 4d6 is double that, so 14. Now, there's a huge distribution. I feel like I should make a little short video on the math of all of this, but there's a huge distribution here of what are the chances you get at least this amount, and that's kind of interesting to do with a binomial distribution, as it would be. It's also worth pointing out the risk, that's the added risk, forgetting about primal miscasting, which is obviously more likely. And keep in mind, if you rolled a 1 in your initial cast, you're probably not gonna, because that's at best you just got a 7. So if you only threw 1 extra primal dice on top of that, then you still need to get a 12 if you don't have any. You need to roll 5 up, and then the 1 out of 6 chance you're primal miscasting, and then it's over, right? So pretty risky already. But then the chance that you don't roll any 1s is around like a 49-ish, 48-ish% chance. It's less than a 50% chance that you don't roll any 1s in these 46, meaning there's a 50% chance you're taking at least, roughly a 50% chance you're taking at least D3 mortal wounds along with it.
Yeah.
So there's a big trade-off mechanic here, and that of course can't be negated, whereas your primal stuff of course can. So I think it's fun. Like you said, are the implication being this is your kind of big risky thing, and this is where everyone's going to have all the stories about it, you know? I do think it's going to have some really great stories, but I also think it's just so swingy. And also, how many units do you need to do that many mortal wounds to? You know, that's also a question. You could overkill something real easily, and then maybe the risk reward's not, you know, as worth it.
It's just a temptation of teleporting a small unit with Seraphon or Legion of Night forwards, then blasting a big monster with this and killing it outright with a 150, 130 point model or something. That is so tempting to me. Like, the amount of it's just such a human emotion that you're feeling, right? You know it's not wise. It's probably not the best option, but the reward is so great.
Yeah, I mean, there are teleporting wizards too. Obviously, the problem is they can't teleport. Most teleports are not in the hero phase; they're in the movement phase. So you would be making yourself a little vulnerable for at least a bit. If you get a double turn, you're in really good shape. I'm thinking also, think about this: Enslaves the Darkness with Archeon in the list. Obviously, he's eating a lot of points up, but you can know who's going to take which turn. So then you could, if you know you're going to get the double turn or whatever in that round or how it's going to play out, you could maybe try to play in such a way that you set up your wizard. I don't know if it works quite that way because you don't know what the next round is. You know what this round is, but still, you know you're going to use that ability, and then that could maybe influence how you do some stuff if you need to just put someone in range. I'm just thinking out loud here, but I do think there's some amount of movement shenanigans. What do you think of this on a lore seeker?
Yeah, that's actually something that was being discussed in the Discords. But yeah, as we mentioned, it's the same risk, right? Lore seeker is still quite expensive for what he does. You're putting him in front of the opponent's army, and you're not even sure at that point whether you're gonna get primal magic dice. And getting this spell off without primal magic dice is not easy, or even likely.
Right, so probably better to just use transporting vortex or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, Stormcast have very survivable wizards. They could always, teleport a wizard and do the thing. And if it fails, I mean, worst case scenario, there's a 4-up save or 3-up save wizard out there that's just going to die. But maybe capture an objective or something. And also, 12 inch is not that short. Sure, for a turn 1 alpha stripe thing, it's gonna require you to risk a lot of stuff, but in turn 3 or even by the end of turn 2, you might be in range of a lot of stuff anyway.
Yeah, it really depends on if they can get you can get rid of their screens, because you can screen this out pretty easily.
Yeah, exactly. So. The thing is, you do have to keep that in mind. It's once again a thing that requires your opponent to keep in mind, like, I have to screen for Merciless Blizzard now, which is also part of its value, right?
Right.
Yeah. Anyway, very cool spell. I am very eager to try it out. I've taken it in my Lumineth list. I'm taking it in my Sylvaneth list tomorrow on my War Song, just for that potential of teleporting through a tree, maybe dropping it later in a turn because the teleport is in the movement phase, I think. So a turn later, dropping it with Merciless Blizzard, then charging in and teleporting back, something like that. I don't know. The Warsong is still pretty survivable in and of itself with the 4+ wards, though it obviously doesn't work against Merciless Blizzards. But yeah, very cool. I love it. It is very high risk, high reward, though.
Yeah.
Anyway, moving on to the enhancements. So here we're arriving at the part where all the non-magic users get to rejoice, because you get to choose Nullstone adornments. There are 3 Nullstone adornments. They are very akin to artifacts of power and actually have a certain kind of rule that interacts with artifacts of powers. So you can take one of the adornments in your army if your army has no wizards or units that can cast spells. That also applies, by the way, to the spell in the ball from KO. So if you have the spell in the ball, you're also not allowed to take Nullstone adornments. So no casting whatsoever, not even in a cheaty way. Not even if your bottle is magical, you can't bring Nullstone adornments. Okay, it'll destroy your bottle, and destroying bottles is not done.
Right.
Yeah. You can also only give a Nullstone Adornment to heroes without an artifact of power or a different Nullstone Adornment. So you'll always only have one per hero if you actually stack them, which you can if you take a different. If you take Command Entourage, for example, and you go for a second enhancement, you could actually choose to have two Nullstone Adornments. We kind of summed them up here, and I didn't go word for word with the description. I kind of summed up what their ruling is. Do you want to go over these, Ryan, or?
Sure.
Yeah.
So let's see. With the hand, this is the one that I have experience with, the hand carved null icon, and I kind of feel like this is going to be the choice, but I could see the other ones being popular. So basically, if you successfully, the guy or lady who has this successfully unbinds or dispels an endless spell, then you get another one. You get another attempt at unbinding or dispel after that unlimitedly until you fail one. Now, obviously, that person has to be within range of the spells that are you could possibly do. And of course, this is hoping that you throw higher than someone who's got casting bonuses or primal magic dice on top of it. So functionally, it sounds better than it actually is, but it could really save an army that really needs to stop some magic. And again, it's one of these things that really benefits you if you're taking an army that goes absolutely not magic. Keeping in mind that unlike those spells that we saw, you don't get to, it's not like every wizard got to choose one of those spells as like their realm spell plus like what they know. This is like that. Not everyone, but it's like an extra unique enhancement that your army gets to take, right? So you're getting one of these no matter what, and you don't have to give an artifact up, except like you said, that you can't have someone who already has an artifact and give them this. Yeah. So it's not quite as good as what the aspect of the champion was in the last GHB, where you could double up and have an artifact and command trait and all that on there. This one, at least you can't double up with an artifact, but it's still a nice buff to give your army, plus the fact that you still get to use all those primal magic dice.
Yeah, I mean, you get just one unbind and dispel for free, and then possibly a whole slew of extra ones after that. And on top of that heroic action that gives you one, that is actually already quite potent, right? You get two more unbinds that you would normally have, which is great. I really like this one.
Yeah. Now, the thing is, if you think about the wording here, is it says in the enemy hero phase. This is not in your turn. So with that dispel that you get, that dispel is only in the enemy hero phase. So that's worth pointing out.
Okay.
Now, the weird thing about this, I don't know if they have. Okay. I'm reading through the rules here. The weird thing about it is they say in the enemy hero. Problem is, in Warhammer speak, in the enemy hero phase is different than at the start of. Which is when you have to dispel spells. So rules as written, I think this is actually not allowing you to do any spelling unless, so I'll read the exact wording out since we've got a summary here, but it says the bearer can attempt to unbind one spell or attempt to dispel one endless spell in the enemy hero phase in the same manner as a wizard, which I think if you're being technical about it means you can't actually spell unless you have a rule that allows you to do it in the actual phase instead of at the start of it. I think it needs some rewording, but just keep in mind that this might be a little funky with dispelling, but it definitely works for unbinding. So, but not in your own turn. In any case, it doesn't let hero phase. So if you don't have access to a dispel normally, like with a priest or something, then you're going to have to do the heroic willpower to allow you to dispel in your own hero phase if that's what you want to do. Okay. So Pouch of Null Dust. This was once the start of the hero phase until it's a once per game until the end of that phase. All casting rolls 1, 2, or 3 are considered primal miscasts, and you also roll 1d6 for each endless spell that's on the table. On a 5-up, it is dispelled.
So it's either a miscast if it's just normal dice, or a primal miscast if you actually include primal magic dice.
Yeah. So
they're not automatically primal miscasts. It's only a primal if your opponent actually has used a primal dice for their casting roll.
Right. Hence the parentheses you put in there.
Yeah.
But so that's good to know that it basically is like this is basically turning off a lot of people's casting because I haven't done the math on this, but I can tell you it definitely significantly increases the chances that this is going to go off. And I think it's more than what it appears on the surface of things. It looks like it's only 3 times more likely, but it's actually, I think, a little bit more, especially once you start throwing those primal dice in there. It gets pretty crazy. So anyway, keep in mind, like if they've got a big character, like they've got a Nagash or a Croak or anyone, obviously this doesn't impact Teclis because he doesn't roll dice. But they're gonna miscast, which means they don't even on forget the primal part. They're gonna very likely miscast something, and then there's a chance that they end up not being able to cast anything else in that phase. Kairos, same story. So this can be pretty brutal. It's kind of like an auto spell ignore almost, or I mean an auto unbind, because it's a once per game kind of thing. But if you, in that one crucial turn, need to shut something off, or maybe you don't use it because they're like Lumineth or some other armies, they're really relying on being able to use their magic for their battle tactic. You shut down, you really increase the chance that they're like going to think it's not worth it by just holding on to this, where they don't choose that battle tactic and they're reliant then on their non-magic related battle tactics. So I think this one actually has a lot of potential depending on who you're going up against. Obviously, if you're going against Khorne, this does nothing, right? So then it's
but none of these do anything against non-magic armies, right?
That's fair. But like, let's pick an army that only has one. Okay, then like this is throwing some stuff away, whereas that one dispel could at least give you something. This is once per game. It's not going to have that big of an impact if they're not that magic heavy.
I can see your point. Every turn. But as someone that has a very strong dislike for once per game abilities or artifacts or anything that's once per game, this is probably one of the first times that I'm actually very hyped about it. Like this is almost a reason in certain army builds to just think like maybe I'm not bringing it out, not allying in a wizard, just because you can take the Patron of Nulldus, for example, because using this against certain armies, and there are enough magic dominant armies in the game right now where I feel like if you're playing a tournament game, you're at least going to face at least one of those, or maybe even two. If this was used against me as a Lumineth or a Seraphon player, or even maybe as a Vampire player, because you have a lot of casters in Soulblight as well, I'm not risking my wizards just to get some spells off. I'm probably not casting anything for that phase, which can be very big, as you mentioned, not only for battle taxes, but just it's almost like you're doing a what's it called? Oh Jesus, the spell at solar eclipse, total eclipse.
Yeah.
But I'm for spells. It just shuts off a complete section of your army, which is very strong.
Yeah. Here's an idea, is that these are just enhancements. You can take an extra enhancement through Command Entourage or Warlord and get another one, and both.
And both?
Right?
Both
you
what?
can take Nullstone Icon and Pouch of Null Dust.
Oh yeah, totally. Mm-hmm.
And then you've got that extra bonus that I talked about that's reliable every turn, and then you've got the threats, the big threat just looming.
Yeah, and that would not even be crazy to do that, right? It's just a big middle finger to any casting army.
Right. And if you're the kind of, like, I can tell you right now, KO auto.
Oh, you dropped away there. KO
has an auto unbind for on an artifact.
Yeah.
So you could double this up and have an auto unbind. You could take an extra enhancement to get one of these, and then you're only raising your by having just one Command Entourage to get like 3 things that are anti-magic.
Mm-hmm.
So pretty strong combos there. Our Stormcast, I can imagine with having no, actually you wouldn't be able to do this because Stormcast guy that does the auto unbind is a Knight Incantor, and he is a wizard, and therefore you can't take the Nullstone. But that line of thinking is what you want to be.
But you could go full priests if you're Stormcast.
Mm-hmm. That's true. Yeah, definitely cool.
Okay, now probably in my eyes the least attractive one of the bunch.
Yeah, so if the bearer is targeted by an endless spell or a spell, or the abilities of an endless spell. Roll 1d6. On a 4+, the caster must pick a different target within 3 inches, and if no other target's in range, it's ignored. Okay? Now, here's the thing, is that area of effect spells are a big thing, and they don't target units. Same thing with the abilities of half the endless spells that you might be worried about. Yeah. It's not necessarily doing it. So to your point, this is very situational, and it's really just to protect a guy that you think is going to be sniped by magic in one way or the other.
What I mostly dislike about this is that it's on a 4+.
Yeah, that's not reliable enough.
Just spending an entire enhancement on protecting one guy from being targeted by the very little spells that actually specifically target something is one thing, but then only doing that on a 4+ is, wow, that is a high price for a little bit more protection.
Right.
Yeah. Right. Okay, so which one are you most hyped about, Ryan? In your KO list, which one are you bringing?
I mean, the Pouch of Null Dust, there was definitely a turn where it would have really made a difference in my turn, but that was also just because I played really poorly against new Starborn Coalesce, or whatever it is. Scaraflon. But, the hand-carved Nullstone icon, I think, is just kind of a default.
Yeah.
But there are so many lists that aren't going to take no wizards, like they're going to take at least one, that these are almost kind of a moot point for unless you're just kind of building that kind of army. So,
yeah, and a lot of armies that aren't bringing wizards already have some kind of protection against spells. Also, so that is interesting. Yeah, it's cool though. I like it, but I feel like it's all the Primal Magic Dice system is probably a better defense against spells than these enhancements are. Which is a bit of a pity, to be honest, as a spellcast lover. Yeah. Okay. Command traits again for the Antorian loci. So not if you're not a wizard, then too bad. If your general is an Antorian locus, you can pick one command trait and give it to your general instead of your normal command traits, obviously. So there's 4. Shaman of the Chilled Lands. This general knows all the spells from the lore of Primal Frost. I actually quite like this one. It's definitely not like an auto take, but I still kind of like it, especially in your first couple of games that are not tournament games. I would probably consider taking this just so you get to try out all those spells. Chill to the Bone. Once per battle, if this general suffers a miscast or primal miscast, you can roll a dice. On a 3+, this general can ignore the effects on that miscast or primal miscast. Seems absolute shit to me. Eye of the Blizzard. At the start of your hero phase, if this general is on the battlefield, roll a dice. On a 5+, you can you get 1 extra primal magic dice. And then Eater of Magic. Each time the general successfully unbinds a spell, roll a dice. On a 5+, the caster no longer knows that spell and may not cast it again for the rest of the battle. There is something that turns in my stomach every time I read Eater of Magic, even though it probably won't happen as often as it makes me feel it will happen. But I just hate the idea of my spells getting eaten. Yeah. Which ones do you like, Ryan?
Well, first off, I think just in the big picture stuff, this is asking you to give up your command trait.
Yeah.
And it's also asking you to make your general a more squishy thing if you were more inclined to have it be something that's bigger. Mm-hmm. And it has to be a wizard. Mm-hmm. So, which are implicitly not as defensive. Now, if you have good bodyguard rules, you're taking full advantage of lookouts or these things, it could be worth it. Now, and also on the contrast, on the other side of the argument, there are a lot of armies that have bad command traits. Like I would argue the Lumineth book doesn't have the best command traits. Yes. So this might actually, from a Lumineth perspective, be really nice. Yep. Okay, so like the first one is really nice if you really want to take anything in the lore of Primal Frost. Forget that you get 3, because this means that you don't have to use up one of your spell choices.
Exactly.
So you can know 3 spells plus the one you get for free, which is nice. Mm-hmm. And then you could also keep a 1-drop list and have access to at least 1. Now, knowing all 3 doesn't go very far if, you're worried about Primal. Like we said, some of them are situational. And then there's also the idea that that if you're not a multicaster. And then a lot of these guys that are the smaller guys that qualify as Antorian locuses aren't going to be multicasters more than about 2. Some of them know 2 spells. Yeah, the miscast or primal miscast, it's too bad you can't put that on someone like Nagash, of course. Nagash would love this with casting 8 spells and then ignoring those that every once in a while when a miscast turns him off. I could see a Slan wanting it, maybe.
Yeah, it's only once per battle though, and even then it's only on a 3+. Jesus.
Yeah, it should. If it's once per battle, it should just be
exactly.
Or a 2+.
Either it's on a 3+ or it's once per battle, but not both.
Yeah, that's rough. Let's see. Getting extra primal magic dice is kind of nice.
Yeah.
Not gonna lie.
Yeah.
That's not a bad thing, and it can push you over that kind of inequity thing you were talking about.
For sure.
And also, of course, we'll talk about the battalions, which helps with that as well. And then Eater of Magic. This is particularly great in Host Arcanum on a Curseling.
Oh yeah.
The Curseling, it just goes nuts on this because in Host Arcanum and Z battle round 1, 3, and 5, you get a free unbind. That's an auto unbind. So, and then you're getting a chance to trigger this. And then the Curseling, whenever he gets successfully gets an unbind, gets to go thing.
Yeah.
And then turning off, stealing someone's spells they know for the rest of the battle. I think this on certain builds is fantastic.
For sure.
But keep in mind, Tzeentch wants to be running the what is it? I forget the one, but it's where you take mortal wounds at the beginning, and then it increases the range of that caster's spells by 9 inches. So they're having to give that up. Tzeentch has some good command traits, so
yeah.
There's a trade-off there, but there are definitely some builds that I could see this being strong with.
Yeah, and it's also pretty good on a wizard that has an auto unbind and you're coming up against something big like Croak or Teclis, and you manage to have them forget their 5-up ward or their mortal wound spell.
Yeah. Brutal.
I mean, the 5+ is very situational. There are probably a lot of games where you're never going to use this, but as a Luneth player, for example, there's this Rune of Senthoi build. I'm not sure whether you're... okay, good.
Yeah.
So that actually adds like +3 to your cast, and obviously there's also the command trait Fast Learn that lets you re-roll one of your unbinds. But still, even without that command trait, Eater of Magic might actually be better than Fast Learner at this point, because having +3 on your unbinds and then having Eater of Magic on top of that is very scary, because it's not once per hero phase or anything. It's every time you successfully unbind a spell.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's a good one.
Yeah. Okay. Moving on to the last part of our part 1 video. It's the battalions, obviously. There are 2. There used to be 3. There are now 2. There is the Antorian Acolytes and the Wizard Finders of Antor, which is a very fun battalion, I think. Some things to keep in mind: no Galician veterans anymore, so that means no fighting in 2 ranks, though you obviously have that change to the coherency rules to allow you to fight it with 6 models in 1 rank instead of 5. The battalions give you an option to gain primal magic dice or extra attacks versus wizards, which are both nice. But once again, every time there is a new battalion in the game, you have to wonder, is it better than a 1-drop?
Right.
And once again, none of these 2 battalions are auto-includes, which is probably good for the game. I just wish there was something that would finally rival the utility of the 1-drop battalion. But that's maybe talk for a different video. Okay, let's first talk about the Antorian Acolytes. So at the start of the hero phase, if there are 2 or more friendly Antorian locus units in this battalion on the battlefield, roll a dice. On a 3+, you gain 1 primal magic dice. So requirements, you obviously need 2 heroes with less than 10 wounds, no mount and not unique, and they need to be Antorian loci. It doesn't actually say on the requirements that they need to be that, but if you want to get anything from this battalion, at least 2 of those heroes need to be Antorian loci. But you can include 3 heroes if you want to. It competes with the command entourage because it kind of fills the same slots. I could see this being useful if you have a specific game plan. I actually don't really rate this very highly. Do you, Ryan?
Yeah, I guess it depends on how necessary primal magic dice end up proving to be.
Yeah.
The funny thing is, it actually again, Primal Magic dice I think are better as unbinding tools, casting tools.
Mm-hmm.
And so in a weird way, you'd almost be thinking of doing this as defense. Obviously, you've got wizards because these have to be wizards to get the extra points. So you wouldn't be in a totally non-magic. You'd be setting yourself up for better unbinds, really, the way I'm looking at it.
Yeah, it's interesting. I love the idea. I think a 3+ is also a good place to be. I do see a bit of a problem with the part where it says that 2 or more friendly Antorian loci units in this battalion on the battlefield. So that means that they have to still be alive. So at the start of the hero phase, let's say by battle round 3, you've probably lost like at least one of these heroes, maybe even both of them. So how often are you actually rolling to get these Primal Magic dice, right?
Yeah, which is why you put the third one in there if you want, for a little redundancy. But yeah, and keep in mind, if you're using those Primal Magic cast, you might explode and then lose one. So yeah.
And the thing is, if you're adding that third hero as a redundancy, you're actually increasing your list with a full drop, which is painful. And also, not only increases your drops, but you cannot use that hero to put it in a command entourage, for example, if you would prefer that over being a 1-drop. So it almost feels like a punishment to me.
Yeah, there's certain armies that don't mind large drops. I feel like Night Haunts, Skaven, and those might really find some use.
Okay, and then the Wizard Finders of Antor. Each time a unit in this battalion is picked to fight, you can. It actually says you can say that they're going on a wizard hunt, which is a very funny phrase to me. But I rephrase it to: you can pick one melee weapon profile on that unit's war scroll. Until the end of that phase, add 1 to the attacks characteristic of that weapon. That is such a difficult word, characteristic.
Yeah.
But all attacks that unit makes that phase must target enemy wizard. So basically, you get 1 extra attack on 1 profile, but you always have to target wizards. I thought this was a little bit derpy, but there are certain situations where this is actually very good on certain units. So requirements: 1 hero with all the usual stuff, so non-unique, less than 10 wounds, etc., etc. 2 infantry units of less than 4 wounds, and 1 behemoth that is not a hero, or not a leader. Sorry, not a leader. You cannot include any wizards in this battalion, which is interesting. So no wardens or anything like that. It does feel very good for specific units. As a Lumineth player, I'm thinking of Blade Lords specifically. They are very good in this, especially in a wizard-heavy meta. This is actually more useful more often than you would think. I think. Well, that was a lot of thinking. It is flexible. I feel like you could do a lot of stuff with this. You don't actually need to use it every time. It just requires a lot of planning, and as you'll probably mention, Ryan, it's always situational, right?
Yeah, I mean, so we're often picturing that the wizards like small guys, but if you're going up against Archeon, or something like I don't know, one of the Mortarks or something in Soulblight. This could be really good because those units do want to get in with. Obviously, you can't split your attacks with someone else. Another good situation, this is anti, but is against wizard units. So now against your wardens and against your sentinels in the world, and Dawn Riders, now those are wizard units until you get them down, until you knock them down to a certain size. But at that point, they're not that big of a threat anymore. So there are definitely some wizard units out there that this would be particularly good against. But again, that's super situational because you don't know. Not that many armies have wizard units. And by units, I mean of consisting of more than 1 model. So it's a thought. I still don't think I would take it unless something just becomes obviously oppressive, like some of those big heroes we were talking about. But keep in mind they're usually pretty tanky. So you're often those extra attacks are maybe not doing as much as you think. So
obviously I'm always looking at it from a Lumineth and a little bit Sylvaneth perspective, or even as a Soulblight player. But you know, putting 2 Blade Lords in there with a cow, that is actually a lot of mileage that you get from that extra attack. Because 10 Blade Lords do mortal wounds on a 2+. Now it's 20 2+. That is a huge uptick. And an extra attack on your 6 damage hammer is also huge on a cow. So if you're facing a lot of Sylvaneth players with Alariel, as you mentioned, Arcane and that kind of stuff, I could see this being used at some point. But as usual, I feel like especially by the time that this book is kind of figured out, we'll all revert back to trying to get 1-drops unless your army doesn't care for it at all.
Right. And you already implicitly referenced this and said it literally, but just to put it out specifically, if the behemoth that's in the battalion is using this rule, if they're only adding 1 attack to 1.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, 1 profile.
So a lot of people are going to be kind of gut instinct thinking, oh, my behemoth gets +1 attack on everything, and which could be like 4 different profiles. And it seems like awesome, but it's just only on the 1.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Okay. So
there's one other thing I want to mention real quick, is that sharpshooters is gone.
Yes.
So
yes.
So if you think about that, that's double painful because that was what obviously no shooting GCs rule about. Now we have nothing to balance out the lookout situation. So yeah. Anyway.
Yeah, it's pretty big. I don't think it was actually used as often as I maybe thought at the beginning. I thought Sentinels would be a perfect fit for that, but they eventually just turned back into a 1-drop. So yeah. That brings us to the end of this video though, Ryan. Part 1 is done. Thank you all for watching. Let us know what you thought about this video. If you've got any more insights, as always, we're super interested. Just drop it in the comments. Feel free to like, share, and subscribe. You can find us in the Discord if you want to chat any further, and keep an eye out for part 2. We'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.